I was walking down the shady part of New York City.
Roy was attending New York Fashion Week.
Yeah,
and he was struck with an idea. My name's Devon Turnbull. I'm an audio enthusiast. I have an art practice and audio equipment manufacturing business called Ojas.
Hi, I'm Roy Delgado, and I'm a speaker guy for Klipsch.
Speaker guy is a great title.
People ask me what I do, and so officially, I'm principal engineer.
I have a long-standing practice of building all kinds of audio equipment, best known for building speakers. And I think people discover my work through a lot of different avenues. I do a lot of pro audio stuff, so a lot of people know of me through nightclub systems and things like that. I also have a pretty popular social media presence as sort of just like a DIYer, enthusiast, builder, craftsman, designer. And I built a lot of my practice around experiences that I had in Japan when I was working there about 20 or a little over 20 years ago now. So my practice, like the Japanese audio scene, is heavily influenced by early American audio engineering, the likes of Western Electric, Altec, RCA. And there is obviously a massive common thread between kind of the world of Paul Klipsch and the important work that's influenced me throughout my path of studying and appropriating and trying to put my own spin on things that have been proven for decades.
The Paul Klipsch's museum, he pays a lot of homage to those guys because he understood that the only reason that we get to where we're at is because you first have to remember where you came from, the history of it, and try to build up on top of that. As he used to say, I stand on the shoulders of giants.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a huge part of what we all do. I think another common reference point for a conversation about Ojas and Klipsch is that I come from a hi-fi, horn-loaded, high-efficiency speaker background in hi-fi, and I have kind of learned to adapt my work in the hi-fi space for use in nightclubs. And slightly different, but similarly, disco culture that kind of adapted a lot of the stuff that Klipsch was doing. When I first started building nightclub systems, all of a sudden everyone sort of started bringing up Mancuso to me. Oh, you must be heavily influenced by Mancuso. You guys are doing a really similar thing, taking a high efficiency hi-fi speaker and adapting it for use in a nightclub. But to be honest, that just wasn't the world that I came from. It wasn't.
Right, you
it wasn't
came in
my
from another
reference point.
direction.
I came from another direction. So, we were essentially doing the same thing. We were applying principles used in hi-fi for a public setting. So, there are a lot of things that will directly relate from my practice and the story of Klipsch.
Oh yeah.
I get a lot of offers, interest from home audio companies to do some kind of collaboration. But most of the time, there's just no synergy between my interests and what I do and, mass market home audio products these days, frankly. Most of them aren't kind of part of the same
route.
Yeah, the same roots, the same principles of engineering, the same philosophies. They're just a complete departure. And so I don't really see where, usually there's just no way for my thing and their thing to mesh into one product that makes sense. So I thought, well, this is a whole different kind of direction. This is really interesting because this is, for one thing, a manufacturing legacy that I can learn from tremendously because I built my little factory in Brooklyn.
Okay.
It's just a few of us building speakers, a few of us for the last few years, but before that, just me building speakers for, 15 more. And although Paul Klipsch obviously had more insight and experience than I did by the time he started Klipsch, when I look at the roots of Klipsch, I relate very much to sort of the way he was just figuring out how to make things. And, he had some groundbreaking principles that he wanted to figure out how to execute. A lot of them were ambitious and probably seemed impossible to a lot of people when they started trying to figure out how to manufacture the Klipsch horn, for example. And it's just a super inspiring legacy to be able to participate in. And, prior to meeting you, I wasn't sure how that would go, I mean, I think that if you had been sort of like apprehensive about the idea of working together, it really wouldn't have worked in the first place.
Well, initially I was like, we're going to do what? And when I looked at particularly this horn, I said, well, that's K5J. And then I became intrigued. And I started talking to Hunter, who's a historian at the museum. And he goes, oh yeah, Paul did this horn. There were other companies that did different flavor rates, basically following a biradial design. And so then that's what intrigued me, and I dig more and more into it, and how you were into the roots of audio. And I knew that Paul, how much he loved the roots of audio, and how he pays tribute to it, making sure people don't forget,
I think another thing that is hopefully part of like the key to the success of this collaboration is that by bringing in some outside perspective and access to a market that's maybe a little bit different than the built-in Klipsch market, we're able to do things that maybe just don't make sense to Klipsch, but are exciting, like using a horn that is manufactured through, kind of old world manufacturing techniques, where like I'm sort of saying we can accept a certain level of like imperfection in their finished quality because they're gonna sound great, but the horn is probably a little bit also more expensive than what would be acceptable in a typical Klipsch build. Mm-hmm. And we can do a lot of things that maybe just kind of gently break the rules of Klipsch, but allow us to just move in directions that seem exciting while we don't have to like stick to a script the same way you do when you're just working.
Well, it definitely, for me, it brought back a bunch of memories. In that, the style of the construction is very much how the Heresy, Cornwall, La Scala were constructed when I first got here. Mm-hmm. The miter concept was just beginning to get into it. And I've told several people at Klipsch, if I had said, hey, let's do a cabinet that looks like that, you know what they would have said? Are you kidding me?
I know, that's exactly what I mean. And I kind of assumed that when I first kind of got your reaction, because I think I had a little bit of a pitch. It was like, here's what I want to do with this speaker, this kind of horn, two-way configuration, adjustable attenuation. I kind of felt that enthusiasm from you, where you're like, hell yeah, I kind of wanted to do these things all along, but you would never let me, so like.
Yeah. In fact, when I showed it to Jerry's going, hey, he used to build the Heresies. Mm. And so that's an HBR. And I go, yeah, it is. Mm-hmm. And also too is that original Klipsch one had the K5J on the top, exposed.
Right.
And we only just kind of started doing that with the Jubilee, even though, we put this front panel on it. Oh, you remember that picture, Paul, and the original rosewood front Klipsch one, he's standing right here in the corner with it. The horn was on top. Mm-hmm. In all its glory, mm-hmm. Not in a cabinet.
Although I did not get into building audio equipment to make a business or start a brand, I just built the things that I was inspired to build, and they kind of just grew in popularity until I sort of just had a brand. But I feel inadvertently did that thing that I always dreamt of doing, which is just make something so simple, but somehow make it look like it's part of my creative identity. Because, I can understand where like a marketing person at a speaker company would just say like, well, what is this? This is not designed. It's just the components on a box. Mm-hmm. And I just feel extremely fortunate to have somehow kind of like found this groove where I've been able to just make a speaker the way I want it to look and not have to mess with it in order to make it look like differentiated in some way.
Right. Well, we had the capability here, when I saw the boxes and we started working on the drawings and stuff, and then you and I started collaborating on, the tuning. It's going to be on a stand and making sure that we get, the sound signature. That I always tell people, you kind of have to have an idea of where it's going to be in order to make it as efficiently sound good as possible. So it's going to be on a stand. We went through, several iterations and stuff. Yeah, and the sandcast horn. And I had to explain to people, sandcast, that's the process of the horn. We used to get sandcast 18-inch baskets, and they had imperfections in it because of the process. I said, so there's that's a given. I mean, but as long as it's within dimensions, making sure everything's going to work okay, then it's fine, because that's you. It's one of those things that you go into it knowing what you're going to get.
So it adds a little bit of like a sort of like intentional unknown imperfection into the mix. But it first and foremost is just the best sounding horn that I know how to make. And also the finish quality is extremely high. If you look at early Altec horns, Altec sandcast horns, the finish quality is much, much rougher than these.
Again, you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been, right? And so I got to play with a lot of those. And then getting back into the K5J, because it kind of became a horn that worked really well, and people started to kind of copy that biradial design. And it even led to the concept of developing constant directivity horns. So that K5J even has its own little roots that are going down. And so to me, the K5J has always been where I would consider starting the pure exponential horns, before that, pure hyperbolics, the pure conicals. You have to go through those in order to understand how you end up to where you want to end up.
Yeah, well, I think I sort of started with like my main Klipsch reference is the heresy. It's sort of early on something that I experimented with a bunch, and has always for 20 years been people who want to get into like low power tube amps and high efficiency speakers, but don't have a huge budget. I've always said, get a pair of vintage heresies. This is an incredible value speaker, and like that will get you
addicted.
Yeah, that'll get you there. That'll get you to where you need to be to start your journey. Heresies are something that have been around forever and experimented with a bit. So that was my first thought, was like, well, I'd probably start with the heresy. It's the Klipsch product that I reference the most. I said, why don't you guys send me a pair of heresies, and I'll just start to sort of deconstruct them, take them apart, and think about like what I would change about this speaker to make it the Ojas version, my perspective on what a heresy could be. I think that when people look at this speaker, they won't even think of a heresy, because it's quite different at this point. So I started by literally just taking the heresy apart, looking at the cabinet, looking at the port, looking at the drivers. I built a prototype cabinet. I just kind of screwed the rear port from the heresy into the front of it in a similar position of this port. I had a 3D printed version of this driver in my studio already, I'd been developing it. So I just bolted that onto the top of it. I had to use a screw-on adapter for the 1-inch 2-bolt pattern.
Oh yeah.
I put the compression driver from the heresy on an adapter, and then I was like, well, what do I do with this tweeter? Because on a package as small as this, I just don't generally need a tweeter, and I don't have like a default place.
The original Klipsch horn was a two-way. And for its time was meeting the frequency response of the media. When LP started getting more top end, and Paul realized he had to get a tweeter and put it in there, so he turned it, and it used to literally just be mounted on one of these veins, on one of the veins.
Right. This is a cool way to do it.
And so he had to convert, but the technology of a compression driver to cover that wider bandwidth was not available at that time.
Exactly. So kind of just knowing that, I said, I bet you if I just take the low pass out of this crossover and run this all the way up, it'll sound great. So I did that, and I thought, let's see what they think about this idea. And I guess the immediate response that I got back was, Roy thinks this is a great idea. Or maybe you were even on that email and you were like, yeah, absolutely, I think this would sound great as a two-way.
Yeah, and that's what I mentioned. We have some compression drivers that could be good candidates for this. And ultimately, what even from Paul's perspective, why he even came up with the Jubilee was supposed to be the K-horn too. He wanted to return it back to a two-way. And Paul says that passive networks are a necessary evil, and or used to say. And so he said, the less ways, the better. And now sometimes it's required,
But it's absolutely the Achilles heel of a speaker design is the crossover.
It's a crossover. But that doesn't mean that there's a way to be able to perfect that art as well too, because when I got here, Paul was working on steep slope networks. And so he was already trying to address the idea of minimizing the interference band at crossover points. And that was back in '86. And so when he started feeling more comfortable, then he brought me in the work that he was doing. And I kind of adopted that because Paul used to tell me best logic has to win. Even if it's not your idea, best logic has to win. And so as he was explaining it to me, it just seemed, well, let's try it. Let's find out. And then we have a pretty accurate software program that helps us do those networks. We don't have to sit with a box and be changing everything, You can do it on the computer. And I've tried to fine-tune that process so that what is designed in the computer actually works in the real world, right? And so Paul was already on that kick, that two-way. And then it turns out when he listened to it, he said, we can't call it a Klipsch Horn 2. And I said, well, you can call it whatever you want. You're Mr. Klipsch. He said, no, it's better in a Klipsch Horn, and why the Jubilee was born. I've designed some two-ways too, whenever possible. In the pro world, sometimes you have to have 3-4 ways because of the maximum output that you're looking for. And now you're getting to spread that bandwidth. So it's necessary sometimes. In a hi-fi environment, if a two-way can do it, I'm there, bro. I'm there. So I was telling Jesse that ultimately, trying to understand the speaker parts, the acoustic properties of the parts, and how we're going to try to meld them together. Ultimately, we have to get every quarter dB out of it that we can. Do we know the coverage patterns? We know the tunings. We have a lot of data, and now we have to figure out how we're going to bring that together. He sent me the dimensions of the box and what you're looking for. Got on our computer, realized that the heresy woofer would work really well in this. And I've always liked, front-mounted ports. On a heresy 4, we can't. I mean, it's like
there's just no space for it.
It's like, so we'd have to increase it even more.
Yeah, that was a big part of also. I just felt like redesigning the heresy. It seemed just super logical. If I could move the other drivers off the baffle, put the port on the front. I did really like the woofer from the heresy. I was like, we don't need to change that. I kept the volume of the cabinet almost exactly the same as the heresy. Moved the compression driver up onto the horn on top. Gave us tons of real estate on the baffle. Then we kind of collaborated on the design of the port from kind of like a tuning aesthetic perspective. Then we, like I said, were already in the process of developing this horn. It was kind of perfect timing for me to cue that up and do a run of the horns that we needed specifically for this project, which was the first relatively scaled manufacturing of this horn. We only made 200 horns, but I had not done that before because most of my work is so bespoke.
I always believe that the Klipsch product should always just come out the level that we're looking for. And if you have to adjust it, do your tone controls. But I also understand where you're coming from because of the pure tubes and the pure sound and everything.
A lot of times, yes. I mean, I actually like a tone control, but they're very rare in the kinds of systems that I usually am working with.
So now we got a little turbo control on there.
Yeah, it gives you a little treble control. I find it super useful too for tuning in a really live room, because a lot of my speakers, although they're designed for home use, they get used in small cafes. I imagine you'll probably see these popping up in small bars and cafes and retail stores and things like that.
Right.
In a room where it's often a very live acoustic room. It's not uncommon for me to see or find my speakers in a room where it's cast concrete floor, cast concrete walls, cast concrete ceiling, bunch of big windows. And so you just need the ability to pad.
You mean the perfect acoustic environment?
The perfect acoustic environment.
Yeah, no, and that's what on the commercial side, a lot of our people, use in ceilings and on the wall and stuff like that. And I tell them, I said, you don't have to compensate for the speaker, you have to compensate for the room, because every room's going to have certain frequencies just because of geometrical acoustical problems, right?
But even, you know, my show that I have right now at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, I have a very large scale listening room there, and I think one of the potentially controversial and experimental aspects of that system for me and my listening systems is that there's a DSP, and we built into the DSP a tone control. So where we're doing the crossover and all the PEQs and everything to tune the system to the room, we also have 3 band dependent sweeps that we can do. Not a isolator, not like they have in DJ mixers, just a sort of a subtle tone control, and it works really well. One of the challenges with a speaker of this size in general, it's a very popular size speaker because you can put it on a piece of furniture. If you have a small apartment that's too small for floor standing speaker, you can do a lot more with it. But you know, most of the time they do just go on the floor, and then it's a bit of an awkward, you know, how do you get it to an acceptable tilt it, or you have to get it up somehow. The question arose pretty quickly, well, what do we do about, like, this thing shouldn't really go on the floor. We want to get the horn up a little bit above. We want to get the listening ear level somewhere in this range. And then, you know, someone was like, oh, well, we've got this stand already that is designed for the heresy. Perfect, so like problem solved. And now we're just making a slightly lower one that will kind of adapt for the new sort of point source.
Correct.
On this speaker.
Right. Because of the way the steep slope network is working, there's a pretty good blend right there in the middle. So yeah, I mean, and it's, again, it does make a difference where you start off with voicing it. And to me, it was always going to be on a stand. And you know, you put it on the floor, it's going to change a little bit, but there's got to be a point of reference of where you want to start. And it was on a stand.
I mean, I was definitely like honored that Klipsch wanted to bring me in and collaborate with me in this way, but also I've just had such an awesome time coming out here, spending several days with you guys at this point.
Twice now,
for several days each time, and I just feel like you guys are lifelong friends, not just some guys in a factory.
Well, you know, and saying stuff like that too is, I mean, we went fishing yesterday. We took you to my friends' the clubhouse. We ate there and stuff, and then I remembered, oh yeah, we're working on a project, right, Devin?
Yeah. There's just not a lot of opportunities. You know, even just like within our country, there just aren't that many opportunities to like really mix people from very different backgrounds and find common ground. What better way could you have to start a friendship than working on a fun project together? So, you know, I feel super privileged and blessed.
I feel the same way too. When I first met you, you know, we kind of hit it off. You hit it off with all the guys here, you know, we became friends. And I think that, to me, that it's like, yeah, you know, Devin and Roy, you know, they got together, did this. Oh yeah, we did a speaker, by the way.
Right.
We caught some fish yesterday.
Yeah, man, good times, you know.
But you're also a very genuine person. And so there's no, I'm gonna borrow this from Paul, there's no bullshit about Devin. You're a very genuine person. And what's not to like?
I'm super happy with the way the speaker sounds. I think it's gonna be really popular. It's gonna be a really versatile speaker for people's homes, small businesses.
And it has an iconic look.
Yeah. I can't wait to kind of gauge people's reaction to this speaker. I think both Klipsch fans and Ojas fans, and maybe people who...
They're gonna go to war.
I think also, especially within that sort of like Mancuso following disco crowd, there are a lot of people who are sort of like Klipsch or Ojas in that context. And then this is like the marriage of the two. So I think it's going to be super surprising for a lot of people.
Yeah, I like that though.
Me too.
I like that when people go like, huh, what? Yeah, listen to it.